The slap landed so fast that half the room heard it before they understood what they had seen. A 41-year-old man in a gray sport coat had just turned on his own mother, a 70-year-old widow with a cane and a paper envelope pressed against her chest. And for one frozen second, the only sound in the courtroom was the squeal of a chair leg dragging across the floor. She stumbled sideways. The audience gasped. The bailiff moved, and Judge Judy, who had spent decades watching people lie, posture, and self-destruct under pressure, stopped everything with 4 words that hit harder than the slap itself. "Don't move, not 1 inch." Her voice cut through the room like steel. The son's jaw tightened. His mother, Lorraine Mercer of Paterson, New Jersey, didn't cry. That was the part people remembered later. She just stared at the floor, one hand on her cheek, as if humiliation had finally become heavier than pain. And if you thought this was just another ugly family meltdown on a courtroom set, you were already behind. Because what happened in that room was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment the story could no longer stay hidden. What looked like one disrespectful son losing his temper was, in reality, the exposed nerve of something colder, older, and far more deliberate. By the time Judge Judy was finished pulling on the thread, the case had stopped being about a slap. It became a documented pattern of intimidation, money extraction, and slow, calculated betrayal against a woman who had spent 40 years working, saving, and trusting the wrong person. And the man who thought he was walking into a small claims dispute for a quick performance had no idea he was about to have his entire character laid out in open court with nowhere left to hide. Lorraine was not suing him because of the slap, not originally. She came in over $5,000, the maximum she could realistically chase in a televised small claims arbitration. The paperwork said the dispute involved a 2008 Buick Lucerne, unpaid utility bills, and money she said her son, Darius Mercer, had taken from her checking account while living in her house after his second divorce. According to the complaint, he promised to help with expenses, then instead drained her account, missed the mortgage contribution he swore he would make, and left her with a shut-off notice from PSE&G and an overdrawn debit card. That alone was ugly, but ugly is common. Judge Judy had seen common. What she was looking at that morning was something else. Darius walked in with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed his innocence in a mirror. Hair trimmed sharp, watch too expensive for someone claiming hardship, shoulders back, mouth already twisted into that dangerous kind of half-smile people wear when they think charm can beat evidence. Lorraine walked in wearing a navy sweater despite the heat of the studio lights. Her left hand shook slightly when she sat down. On her lap was a manila envelope so worn at the edges it looked as if she had opened and closed it 100 times trying to decide whether telling the truth was worth the cost. Judge Judy noticed both of them immediately. Darius's story was simple, too simple. He said his mother had gifted him money because he had been helping care for her after a fall in February. He said the car had been basically abandoned to him. He said the utility bills were her responsibility. And then he made the mistake that changed the temperature in the room. He called Lorraine confused. Judge Judy leaned forward. "Confused people do not file itemized claims with attached bank statements," she said. "Confused people do not bring dates, times, and receipts. Lazy liars call other people confused when the paperwork is bad for them." That line got a reaction. But not from the audience, from Darius. You could see it in his face. The mask slipped for half a second. Not because he was offended, because he realized this judge was not going to let him dominate the room. If you appreciate stories where power finally meets consequences, stay with me. Because this was the point where a family money dispute started turning into an elder abuse case in plain sight. Lorraine explained that after her husband died in 2019, Darius moved back into her house temporarily. Temporary became 16 months, then came the borrowing. First $300, then $800. Then he needed access to her debit card for groceries because, according to him, the app was easier. Lorraine said she trusted him because he was her son. By April, there were ATM withdrawals she didn't recognize. By May, the car title had been signed over under circumstances she said she did not understand. By June, her gas bill was past due, her prescription refill had been delayed, and Darius was telling neighbors he was handling her finances now. That should have been enough to win the case. It wasn't, because then the bailiff stepped forward and quietly handed the judge a note. Judge Judy read it once, then again. Her face didn't change much, but the room did. The air seemed to tighten. She looked at Darius, then at Lorraine's cheek, which had begun to redden under the makeup lights. "What happened in the hallway?" she asked. Darius answered too quickly. "Nothing." Judge Judy did not blink. "That's not an answer." He shifted. "I touched her arm. She was being dramatic." That was when Lorraine finally spoke without looking at him. "He hit me because he thought I brought the second envelope." Now the room was silent in an entirely different way. The second envelope turned out to be the center of gravity in the whole case. Lorraine had brought one set of documents for the formal claim. The second envelope contained what she had been too embarrassed to show anyone at first: a handwritten list of withdrawals, a copy of a pawn ticket dated August 14th, and printouts from her bank showing 18 cash withdrawals over 11 weeks at 3 different ATMs, most of them made between 11:30 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. while she was at home asleep. The total wasn't $5,000, it was 11,842s. And it got worse, because tucked behind those statements was a short letter from her physician confirming that Lorraine had arthritis in both hands and had not driven at night in over a year. The ATM photos, once production pulled them up from the bank packet she'd submitted, showed a man in a dark cap making the withdrawals. The timestamp pattern matched nights Darius had taken her car. Then came the pawn ticket for her late husband's wedding band. Then a store receipt for a 65-inch television purchased 2 days after one of the largest withdrawals. Then a payday loan notice in Lorraine's name she swore she never signed. That was when the story stopped being ordinary. Judge Judy asked Darius a question so simple it trapped him on the spot. "If this was all gifted to you, why are you taking it out of ATMs after midnight like you're afraid to be seen?" He had no good answer, so he tried arrogance instead. "I'm her son," he said. "Everything I did was for that house." Judge Judy's reaction shocked the room, not because she raised her voice, but because she lowered it. "No," she said, "everything you did was for yourself. Let me explain something to you, sir. Being somebody's child does not make you their owner. It does not give you title to their pension, their ring, their car, or their dignity. You are not a dependent. You are a predator with a family connection." You could feel the impact of that sentence before anyone moved. Then production security confirmed they had hallway footage. Darius had not touched her arm. He had stepped toward Lorraine after the note about the second envelope, grabbed her wrist and slapped her across the face when she pulled away. It was fast. It was clean. It was unmistakable. And the ugliest part was what the audio caught just before contact. "Don't start talking now." That line reframed everything. This was no spontaneous flare of temper. It was panic. The panic of a man who knew that once the documents came out, his version of the story was dead. If you believe no one is above accountability, stay with me. Because from that moment on, Judge Judy stopped treating Darius like a difficult defendant and started handling him like what the evidence suggested he was: a man who used fear to manage an elderly victim until the paperwork outran him. She asked Lorraine why she had waited so long to sue. The answer was devastating in its simplicity: "Because I kept hoping he would become my son again." That is the kind of sentence no performance can survive. The ruling itself was brutal in its precision. Judge Judy awarded Lorraine the full $5,000 on the civil claim immediately. She ordered Darius removed from the courtroom. She directed security to preserve the hallway footage. She stated on the record that the conduct shown was consistent with coercive financial abuse and physical intimidation. And once the taping ended, studio security turned the incident report and video over to law enforcement, while Lorraine was connected with victim services and adult protective resources before she ever left the building. But the public humiliation was only the first consequence. Over the next several months, the rest of the damage surfaced. Lorraine's bank flagged the withdrawal pattern. The payday loan account was frozen. The pawned ring was traced. Investigators found that Darius had used her debit card repeatedly while telling creditors He had authority over her finances. In a later plea arrangement, he admitted to unlawful use of her financial information and misdemeanor elder abuse tied to the on-site assault. He was ordered to pay restitution, stay away from Lorraine, surrender any claim to the vehicle, and serve county time followed by supervised probation. The exact punishment mattered less than the record itself. What had been whispered inside a family was now documented by the court, and Lorraine changed too, not overnight, not in some sentimental movie script way, but she changed in the way people do when the truth is finally said out loud by someone who cannot be bullied. She stopped apologizing for keeping receipts. She stopped calling the theft borrowing. She stopped explaining his violence as stress. By the time she gave her victim statement, she was no longer asking whether she had overreacted. She was naming what happened to her with frightening clarity. "He didn't just take my money," she said. "He used being my son as the weapon." That may have been the most important line in the entire case, because stories like this are never only about one slap. They are about the long permission structure that comes before it. The excuses, the minimization, the relatives who say that's just how he is, the neighbors who hear shouting and decide it's private, the institutions that miss the first sign because the victim is old, tired, embarrassed, and still trying to protect the person hurting them. What Judge Judy reacted to in that room was not just disrespect, it was entitlement reaching its final form. And maybe that is why the moment hit so hard. Not because a courtroom saw a son disgrace himself, but because, for once, the shame landed where it belonged. At the end of the hearing, after the ruling, after security moved Darius out of sight, Lorraine gathered her envelope with both hands and stood up slowly. Judge Judy looked at her and said something that did not sound like television at all. "You were not wrong to tell the truth late. You would only have been wrong never to tell it." That stayed with people, because in the final image, the powerful figure was not the man who had spent months taking what he wanted. It was the older woman he thought he had trained into silence, walking out of that courtroom with her evidence, her name, and the record finally on her side. And the son who slapped his 70-year-old mother to stop the truth learned the lesson he should have feared from the beginning. When contempt meets proof, it doesn't look like power. It looks like collapse. If cases like this make you think, let me know in the comments. Because the most dangerous people are often not the loudest criminals in the street. Sometimes they are the ones sitting at the family table, calling exploitation help, calling theft support, calling cruelty stress, until one day the room goes quiet, the evidence comes out, and someone with authority says the one thing they can't survive hearing: "I believe you.